Shalom, y'all, from North Georgia, from Machane Ramat, Darom. So great to be together for a little something for Shabbat. In this week's Torah portion, Parshat Lecha, we learn an important message about garnering spiritual strength in times of crisis, of figuring out what our resources are that help us to dig deep into our inner knowledge and our inner knowing so that we can then have the strength to stand up and to say what's right and to do what's right in times of crisis. Where do we see that? Well, Moses sends 12 heads of tribes. These are leaders. They're called anashim, respectable people in the community, to go and do a reconnaissance mission of the land of Israel. See, they're still outside of the land, wandering for 40 years, but they don't know anything about the land, really. So these 12 heads of tribes are sent over to check it out. What is the land like? What's growing there? Who are the people that live there? What is their military prowess? What's the agriculture like? Come back and give us a report. So the verse says, Vayalu b'negev vayavo ad Chevron, that they went up to the Negev, which sounds funny, but they were outside the land, vayavo ad Chevron, and he went to Chevron. So it sounds like in plural they all went, and then one went to Chevron. So the rabbis in the Talmud ask, who's the one, vayavo ad Chevron? Who's that? Who left the group? Well, while all the other people, all the other heads of tribes were checking out what we call the gashmiut, the externals of the land, Kalev ben Yefuna is identified as the one alone who wants to go check out the internal of the land, the spiritual value of the land. So where does he go to do that? Chevron. What's in Chevron? Ma'arat HaMachpelah, the burial place of the ancestors, of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. So he goes there to do an internal and a spiritual reconnaissance mission, to connect with the ancestors, to garner the spiritual strength of the promise of the inheritance of the lands. When you have a sense of emunah, of trust, of promise, of spiritual connection, then the externals don't really matter, do they? Well, he takes that spiritual strength that he garners from that visit with the matriarchs and patriarchs, and he brings that report back with the others. So here they are, back with the group of people, back with Moses and everybody witnessing this report of the land. Mahi, so tell us, what is it like? Well, the other 11 heads of tribes, they start giving their report. They're like, it's a great land. Yes, it is flowing with milk and honey, but they say, and that's the operative word here, there are Bnei Anakim who live there. There are giants who live there. And there's no way that we can actually get into that land and conquer. And they see themselves as chagavim, as grasshoppers in our own eyes, they say. They don't say that others saw them as grasshoppers. They say we see ourselves as grasshoppers. They did themselves in with their own negative report. Well, what happens then? Kalev ben Yefuna gets up and says, Alo na'aleh, we can do it. We can conquer this land. We can fulfill this mission. Why? He alone is the one who garnered that internal spiritual strength, connecting to the promise, knowing that even though it might be hard, even though it might be challenging, we have that spiritual strength with us. We have the inheritance and we have the promise. What can we learn from this? Sometimes we face adversity. Sometimes we find ourselves in crisis. Sometimes we find ourselves alone with an opinion that may seem more positive, more knowing, more loving, and more compassionate, and more full of what we call it, positivity. And we find ourselves amongst people who are really going against us and really trying to bring us down. So the message for us is, when we find ourselves in those times of crisis, to dig deep for that resource of strength, for that resource of spirituality and inner knowing, and not to be afraid to speak up for what we know is right. So let's be like Kalev ben Yefuna and say, Alo na'aleh. Yeah, it might be hard, but we can do it. But better yet, we can do it together. Shabbat Shalom.